I've spent most of my life as the steady hand in the Duggar home. I've kept the peace, followed the rules, and honored my father. But last Tuesday, a package arrived from Grandma Mary's estate lawyer. Something that had been held in a private vault for 7 years, with strict instructions to be opened only by me. Inside was a heavy brass key and a handwritten letter from Grandma, dated just weeks before her passing in 2019. Her handwriting was shaky, but her message was clear. She wrote, "Jana, they will tell you my death was an accident, but I am leaving you the proof of what they are really hiding in the big house." Following the key, I found myself in a small, dusty bank in rural Arkansas. Inside a safety deposit box that my father has been desperately trying to locate for years, I found an old VHS tape. A tape that records a conversation my father thought was erased forever. A conversation about a secret contract that changed our family's destiny before I was even born. I always wondered why Grandma Mary seemed so burdened in her final days. Now, as I hold this tape, I realize she wasn't just tired, she was terrified. Tonight, for the first time, I am stepping out of the shadows of the big house to show you what Grandma wanted the world to know. This is the truth my father feared, and it starts right now. Everyone knows me as the daughter who stayed, the one who looked after the little ones, the one who painted the walls of the big house, and the one who kept the family secrets buried deep. For years, I believed that my loyalty was my greatest virtue. But last Tuesday, everything I thought I knew about my family began to unravel. It started with a plain, brown envelope that arrived by certified mail. It wasn't addressed to the Duggars or to my father. It was addressed only to me, Jana Mary Duggar. Inside was a letter from a law firm in a small town I hadn't visited in years. The letter was dated June 2019, just 2 weeks before Grandma Mary passed away so suddenly. The lawyer explained that Grandma had left behind a restricted asset that was to be released only if certain conditions were met. And apparently, those conditions had finally been triggered. As I pulled out the heavy, tarnished brass key that was taped to the bottom of the envelope, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Grandma Mary didn't do things like this. She was a woman of simple faith, or so I thought. The letter included a short note in Grandma's own handwriting. It said, "Jana, my sweet girl, you have always been the bridge that holds this family together. But a bridge cannot stand on a foundation of sand. Your father has spent $20 million of the ministry's money to build a wall around the truth. This key opens the door through that wall. Use it wisely, but use it soon. Time is running out for all of us." I sat at the kitchen table for an hour, just staring at that key. I realized that Grandma didn't just leave me a memory, she left me a burden. I started thinking back to the summer of 2019. Grandma Mary was 82, but she was still so sharp. However, in those last few weeks, she changed. I remember finding her sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the property with tears in her eyes. When I asked her what was wrong, she would just squeeze my hand and say, Jana, the cameras see the smile, but the Lord sees the heart. Don't ever let them take your heart. At the time, I thought she was just getting older, perhaps reflecting on life. Now, I see it was a warning. I remember one afternoon, I saw my father and Grandma Mary in the hallway. They didn't see me. My father was speaking in that low, hushed tone he uses when he's angry but trying to hide it. He was saying something about the agreement and protecting the legacy. Grandma Mary stood her ground. She looked him right in the eye and said, "Jim Bob, you can't buy a clear conscience with a trust fund. That girl deserves to be known." My father turned red and walked away, slamming his office door. I didn't know who that girl was back then. I didn't know about the $20 million. I just knew that Grandma was scared of her own son. Then came the day of the accident. The official story was that she slipped and fell in the pool. It was a tragedy that broke our hearts. But as I look at this letter, written just days before, I see a woman who knew her time was short. She wasn't preparing for an accident. She was preparing for a revelation. She knew that if she didn't hide the truth in a safe deposit box, it would be buried with her. As the oldest daughter, I realized I was the only one she could trust to not be bought by the family bank account. Oh, I didn't tell anyone about the key. Not my sisters, not my brothers, and certainly not my father. I waited until my father was away on a ministry trip to Little Rock. I got into my car and drove 3 hours to a small, sleepy town near the Oklahoma border. The bank was old, a brick building that looked like it belonged in a different century. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely sign the access form at the desk. The clerk looked at the key, then at me and whispered, "We've been waiting a long time for someone to come for this. Miss Duggar?" They led me into a small, windowless room in the back of the vault. The air was stale and cold. The clerk brought out a long metal box and slid it onto the table. When I turned the key, the lock gave way with a heavy, metallic click. Inside, there was no gold, no jewelry. There was an old VHS tape, a stack of bank transfers from 1994, and a photo I had never seen. It was a photo of Grandma Mary holding a baby girl, a baby that didn't look like any of my siblings, yet had that unmistakable Duggar smile. As I held that tape, I realized I was holding the evidence that would destroy the image of the perfect family we had presented to the world for decades. This was the secret 20th child. This was the girl my father had spent $20 million to erase. I knew that by taking this box. I was choosing a side. I was choosing Grandma Mary's truth over my father's empire. I walked out of that bank with the tape tucked under my arm, knowing that my life in the big house was officially over. The silence was finally broken. I drove back from that bank in a daze. I couldn't go home to the big house. There are too many eyes there, too many people who would ask questions. Instead, I went to a small rental property I help manage. In the back of a closet, I found an old television with a built-in VCR, the kind we used to watch our home movies on before everything became digital and polished for TV. My heart was thumping so loud it felt like it was in my throat. I stared at the tape. It was labeled in Grandma's neat, cursive script, the price of the image, $19.94. I pushed the tape into the machine. The mechanical whirring sound filled the quiet room. The screen flickered with static for a few seconds, and then there she was. Grandma Mary. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, but she looked different. This wasn't the smiling grandmother from the TLC specials. She looked tired, her eyes red as if she had been crying for days. She looked directly into the camera and said, "Jana, if you are seeing this, it means I am no longer there to protect you from the truth. And it means my son has chosen the ministry's money over his own blood." On the tape, Grandma Mary held up a ledger, a thick book of accounts. She started explaining that in 1994, right as our family started gaining local attention, something happened that could have ended it all. A young woman, a distant relative of a family friend, had come to Grandma Mary in tears. She was pregnant, and the father was someone the world saw as a pillar of morality. Grandma's voice broke on the tape as she said, Jim Bob didn't repent. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for a checkbook. Oh, as the tape continued, Grandma Mary began to read from a legal document. It was a contract, a silence agreement, worth $5 million at the time, which was set up in a compounding trust fund that would grow to over $20 million by the time the child turned 30. But the money came with a price that was even higher. The child and the mother had to be relocated to a remote part of Europe, and they were legally barred from ever setting foot on American soil as long as our show was on the air. Grandma Mary looked absolutely broken on that screen. She confessed that she was the one who originally helped set up the bank account, thinking she was protecting her son's future. But she realized too late that she had helped him commit a spiritual crime. "I watched him grow famous," she said on the tape. "I watched the world praise him for being a father of 19, while I knew there was a 20th child, a daughter named Faith, who was being paid to act like she didn't exist. Every time I saw a new baby born into this family, my heart bled for the one we sent away." She then showed something to the camera that made me gasp. It was a wire transfer receipt from a ministry account. Not his personal money, but money donated by people who believed they were supporting a mission. My father had used $20 million of God's money to bury his own daughter's existence. Grandma Mary whispered, "He told me it was for the greater good." But Jana, there is no good in a lie this big. He didn't save the family, he bought a disguise. The most chilling part of the tape came at the end. Grandma Mary leaned closer to the lens. She said, "Jim Bob knows I kept the documents. He's been threatening to put me in a home, to tell the world I've lost my mind. If I ever speak, he's even threatened to take away your inheritance, Jana, because he knows you're the one I'm closest to. But I can't die with this on my soul." She held up the brass key I had just used. "I'm hiding this key where he can't find it. Jana, you have to find Faith. You have to tell her she has a family that loves her, even if her father only loved his reputation. The tape cut to static. I sat in the dark room. The only sound was the clack, clack of the VCR reaching the end of the reel. I realized that my father's entire adept, free, and godly lifestyle was a carefully constructed mask. He wasn't just a strict father, he was a man who had effectively exiled a child for the sake of a TV contract. I looked at the photo I found in the box, the one of Grandma Mary holding that baby girl. The baby had my eyes. She had Jess's smile. I knew I couldn't go back to being the quiet daughter anymore. If I stayed silent now, I was just as guilty as the lawyers who wrote that contract. I took the tape out of the machine and hid it in my bag. I didn't know where to start looking for a girl who had been hidden for 30 years, but I knew one thing. Grandma Mary didn't die of a simple accident. She died trying to make sure this tape reached me. The big house wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in that small rental house, spreading the documents from Grandma Mary's box across the floor. To the world, my father is a man of simple faith, but these papers showed he was a master of complex finance. I saw names of shell companies I had never heard of: Hilltop Holdings, Legacy Trust, and Mercy Management. All of them were registered in states with strict privacy laws. But as I cross-referenced the dates, a pattern emerged. Every year, on April 14th, the date of the birth, a massive wire transfer was made from a ministry-linked account to a private bank in Zurich, Switzerland. The amount was always the same, or 250 Zalosen as an annual maintenance fee. My father wasn't just paying for this child's life. He was paying for her absolute disappearance. He was using the donations of hard-working church-goers to fund a life of exile for a daughter he refused to acknowledge. The $20 million wasn't just a lump sum, it was a growing empire of silence. Then I found a small, yellowed sticky note tucked inside an old passport in the box. It had a name written in Grandma's handwriting, Isabella Rossi. Underneath it was a location, Lake Lugano, Switzerland. I realized Isabella was the mother's name. My father hadn't just sent them away. He had forced them to change their identities. He wanted to make sure that if anyone ever went looking for a Duggar in Europe, they would find nothing but ghosts. I'm not as tech savvy as some of my younger brothers, but I know how to search for the truth. I spent hours on international database sites. If this girl was 30 years old now, she would have a life, a job, a social media presence, a face. I searched for Faith Rossi and Faith Duggar, but found nothing. Then I remembered Grandma's note about the Duggar smile. I started looking for young women in the Lugano area who looked like us. That's when I saw her, a photo on a local Swiss charity website. A woman named Faith Rossi Vieri. She was standing in a garden, much like the one I tend to at the big house. She had the same high cheekbones as my mother and the same calm, steady eyes that I see in the mirror every morning. The caption said she was a nurse who specialized in caring for the elderly. My heart stopped. She was doing exactly what I do. Taking care of people, staying in the background, being the steady hand. I found her birth records in a digitized Swiss archive. April 14, 1994. The mother was listed as Isabella Rossi, but the father's name was undisclosed. However, the hospital bill had been paid by a law firm based in Little Rock, Arkansas, the same firm that handles all of my father's special business. It was her. My sister wasn't a myth or a rumor. She was a real person, living a real life, completely unaware that she had 19 siblings across the ocean who had been told she didn't exist. While I was deep in the papers, my phone started buzzing. It was my father. I didn't answer. Then a text came through, a Jana. I know you were at the bank. I know what you took. Bring the box home immediately. This is for your own protection. Don't let your curiosity destroy this family. He wasn't asking, he was commanding. I realized then that my father had a flag on that safety deposit box. The moment I turned that key, an alert had been sent to his legal team. I felt a wave of terror. If he knew I had the box, he knew I had the tape. I realized I couldn't go back to the big house. If I walked through those gates, I might never be allowed to leave with this evidence. He would call it protecting the ministry, but I knew it was about protecting his throne. I looked at the photo of Faith on my laptop screen. She looked so peaceful. I wondered, if I tell her the truth, am I saving her, or am I bringing the Duggar curse into her life? I packed the documents into my bag and grabbed Grandma's tape. I knew I had to get to her before my father's security team did. He had $20 million and a team of lawyers, but I had the one thing he was terrified of. The truth, I booked a flight to Zurich for the next morning. I didn't tell a soul. As I drove toward the airport, leaving the lights of Tonatown behind, I whispered a prayer. Grandma, give me the strength you had. I'm going to find her. The search for the 20th child was no longer a secret. It was a mission. I've traveled many times for mission trips, but this flight was different. As the plane touched down in Zurich, I felt like I was stepping into another world, a world my father had spent $20 million to keep me away from. Every person I saw in the airport made me jump. I kept wondering if one of my father's associates was already there, watching me. But the beauty of the Swiss Alps was a sharp contrast to the ugly secret I was carrying in my bag. I took the train south toward Lake Lugano. As the palm trees and the sparkling blue water came into view, I understood why Isabella and Faith were sent here. It's a paradise, but it's also a fortress of isolation. It's far enough to be forgotten, but expensive enough to require a benefactor. My father didn't just exile them, he bought them a beautiful cage. I checked into a small out of the Way Hotel under my mother's maiden name. I couldn't risk the name Duggar showing up on any registry. That evening, I sat on the balcony, looking at the lights reflecting off the lake. I held the VHS tape in my hand. I thought about the 19 siblings back home, probably sitting down for dinner at the big house, completely unaware that their eldest sister was across the ocean hunting for a ghost. I felt a deep sense of loneliness, but also a strange new strength. For the first time in 36 years, I wasn't doing what Jim Bob Duggar told me to do. I was doing what was right. The next morning, I followed the address I had found in Grandma Mary's notes. It led to a quiet, upscale neighborhood on the hillside overlooking the lake. There was a small, stone-walled cottage with roses climbing the fence. It looked exactly like the kind of garden I always dreamed of having. As I stood across the street, hidden behind a tall hedge, the front door opened. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. It was her, Faith. She was wearing a simple nurse's uniform, carrying a small bag. She didn't look like a scandal or a mistake. She looked like a daughter of God. She walked with the same purposeful stride that Jinger has. She stopped to pick a dead leaf off a rose bush. A habit I've had my whole life. Seeing her in person, in the flesh, made the $20 million seem so small and pathetic. How could a father look at this beautiful soul and see only something to be hidden? I stayed there for an hour, just watching her from a distance. I saw her greet a neighbor with a warm smile, the same smile that has been on every magazine cover our family has ever touched. But her smile was different. It was free. It didn't have the pressure of a camera crew behind it. I realized that while my father thought he was punishing her by sending her away, he had accidentally given her the one thing the rest of us never had, a normal life. But I also knew that her life was built on a foundation of lies, and I was the one holding the hammer. I knew I couldn't just walk up to her front door. Those tinted windows on the Mercedes were watching. My father's tour 20 to million wasn't just sitting in a bank, it was paying for eyes on every corner of Faith's life. I spent the next day observing her routine from a safe distance. I noticed that every afternoon at 4:00 p.m., she walks to a small, secluded chapel at the edge of the lake to pray. It's a place where tourists don't go, and the security cars can't follow her onto the narrow walking path. I dressed in a simple dark coat and a headscarf, looking like any other local woman going to prayer. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. In my pocket, I carried the most dangerous weapon I owned, Grandma Mary's brass key. I arrived at the chapel 10 minutes early and sat in the very last pew in the shadows. The smell of incense and old wood was heavy in the air. Then the heavy oak door creaked open, and she walked in. She didn't see me at first. She walked to the front, lit a candle, and knelt down. I watched her profile, the same profile I've seen in my sisters Jinger and Joy, Anna. She looked so burdened, her shoulders heavy with a weight she didn't even understand. I realized that while she had a perfect life in Switzerland, she had been living with a hole in her heart, never knowing who she truly was. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like lead, and walked toward the front. Oh, I knelt down right beside her. She didn't look up, thinking I was just another stranger. I waited for a moment. Then I whispered in English, "You have your grandmother's eyes, Faith." She froze. Her entire body went rigid. No one in this town called her Faith. Here, she was Isabella's daughter. She turned her head slowly, her eyes wide with a terror that broke my heart. She looked at me, searching my face, and then her breath hitched. She recognized me. She had seen the magazines. She had seen the show. Jana, she whispered. Her voice was like a ghost's, soft, trembling, and filled with years of suppressed longing. I took her hand. It was the first time I had ever touched my sister. Her skin was warm, and she was real. I said, "I'm so sorry it took me 30 years to find you. Grandma Mary sent me." Tears started flowing down her face instantly. She didn't ask about the money or the scandal. She just leaned into me and sobbed quietly in that empty chapel. She told me that her mother, Isabella, had told her stories about a large family in the West, but was always too afraid to say the name Duggar. Faith told me she grew up feeling like she was a secret that shouldn't exist. "I used to watch clips of your show on the internet," she said, her voice cracking. "I would see you all laughing and singing, and I would wonder why I wasn't allowed to be there. I thought I was a sin that needed to be hidden." I held her tighter, realizing that 20 million hadn't just bought her silence. It had almost destroyed her spirit. We didn't have much time. I knew the security would be looking for her if she stayed too long. I pulled out the brass key and pressed it into her hand. I told her about the safety deposit box, the bank transfers, and most importantly, the VHS tape. I told her that our father, Jim Bob, had used ministry funds to keep her existence a secret from us. Her eyes turned from sadness to a cold, sharp anger. "He's been paying for my mother's medical bills," she said. "But now I see it wasn't out of kindness. It was to keep us under his thumb." Faith looked at the door of the chapel and then back at me. "Jana, you shouldn't have come. If they find out you're here, they will stop the payments. My mother will be moved to a state ward. She won't survive that." I realized my father's cruelty was more calculated than I ever imagined. He had created a system where the only way for Faith to keep her mother alive was to remain a ghost. But I looked her in the eye and said, "Grandma Mary knew this day would come. The money he used to blackmail you, it doesn't belong to him. It belongs to the truth." I told her my plan. I wasn't just there to say hello. I was there to bring her home. But we had to move fast. My father's lawyers were already filing emergency protection orders back in Arkansas to freeze Grandma Mary's estate. We had 48 hours before the bank in Switzerland would be notified to stop any more access to the records. As we left the chapel separately, I felt a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just the quiet sister anymore. I was a rescuer. And for the first time in 36 years, I knew exactly what I was fighting for. The 20 million secret was about to meet its match. After our meeting in the chapel, I knew we couldn't meet in public again. Faith gave me the address of a small nursing office where she works the night shift. At midnight, I slipped through the back entrance, carrying the heavy folder of documents I had taken from Grandma Mary's box. We sat in a small, sterile break room lit only by the glow of a single desk lamp. It was there, in the quiet of the Swiss night, that we began to follow the money trail that had defined both of our lives. I laid out the bank transfers on the table. Faith's eyes widened as she saw the numbers. She had always been told that her anonymous benefactor provided just enough for their modest life and her mother's medical care. She never knew there was $20 million tied to her name. But as we looked closer at the Mercy Management shell company, we noticed something horrifying. The money wasn't just coming from my father's personal savings. The transfers were labeled as international mission grants and crisis relief funds. My heart sank. My father hadn't just used his own money to hide his secret. He had used the money donated by faithful church members, people who lived on Social Security and small pensions, people who thought their widow's mite was going to spread the gospel. Instead, their sacrifices were being used to pay for a high-end villa in Lugano and a team of lawyers to keep a daughter in exile. The ministry wasn't just a calling, it was a laundering machine for my father's reputation. Faith pulled out her own small box of records, the ones her mother, Isabella, had kept hidden under a floorboard. Among them was a letter from a lawyer in Little Rock, dated 5 years ago. It was a cold, clinical warning. It stated that if Faith ever attempted to contact the United States Embassy or any unknown associates of the Duggar family, the funding for her mother's specialized life support treatment would be terminated with immediate effect. It wasn't a gift of care. It was a medical ransom. Faith looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of rage and grief. "Jana," she whispered, "every time I thought about finding you, I looked at my mother in that hospital bed." He knew I wouldn't risk her life. He used my love for my mother to keep me silent. I realized then that Jim Bob Duggar's greatest skill wasn't preaching. It was identifying a person's deepest love and using it as a cage. He had turned the sanctity of life into a bargaining chip. But then we found the most shocking document of all. It was a final liquidation plan scheduled for April 2026. Just a few months away, the plan stated that once the trust reached its 32-year maturity, the remaining assets would be transferred back to a private account held by Jim Bob Duggar, and the support for Isabella and Faith would be officially closed. My father wasn't just hiding her. He was waiting for the clock to run out so he could take the money back and leave them with nothing. He was going to discard them like they never existed. I stood up and paced the small room. The hypocrisy was more than I could bear. My father was on television every week talking about family values and a financial freedom while he was planning to abandon his own daughter and her dying mother in a foreign country. I looked at Faith and said, "We can't just hide anymore. If we wait until April, he wins. He takes the money, he keeps the secret, and he leaves you with nothing. We have to take the fight to him." Faith was terrified. "But Jana, he has the lawyers. He has the power in Arkansas. What do we have?" I held up Grandma Mary's VHS tape. We have her voice, I said, and we have the proof that he used ministry funds for a private cover-up. That's not just a family secret, Faith. That's a federal crime. I realized that by exposing this, I might lose everything. My inheritance, my home at the big house, and my relationship with many of my siblings. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly clean while I made a plan. We wouldn't go to the police in Switzerland. My father's lawyers had too much influence here. We had to get back to the United States. We had to bring the 20 million secret to the only place where Jim Bob Duggar couldn't hide, the court of public opinion. As the sun began to rise over Lake Lugano, I realized the quiet daughter was gone. I was bringing the 20th child home, and I didn't care if I had to burn the big house down to do it. The paper trail ended here. The battle was just beginning. Here is the full, clean English text for segment 7 through to the ending part. This script is designed for a 1-hour deep dive investigative special narrated by Jana Duggar in her signature calm, sincere, and powerful voice, tailored for a 65th female audience. When new time was running out, my father's security team had realized that Faith and I were communicating. That black Mercedes was now parked permanently at the end of her street. I told Faith, "We have to leave now, before the bank freezes your accounts, and your mother's care is compromised." With the help of a local doctor who wasn't on my father's payroll, we arranged for Faith's mother to be moved to a private clinic in secret. Then, under the cover of a rainstorm, we hiked through the back trails of Lugano to the train station. I looked back at the lights of the lake one last time. My father's $20 million had built this cage, but for the first time in 30 years, the door was wide open. We weren't just running, we were reclaiming a life. Stepping off the plane in Little Rock felt like entering a battlefield. Faith was trembling. This was the country that had paid for her to stay away. I didn't take her to the big house yet. I knew the lawyers would be waiting there. Instead, we went to Jill's house. When Jill saw Faith, she didn't ask for a DNA test. She just wept and held her. In that moment, the years of silence and the $20 million secret didn't matter. What mattered was that the sisters were finally together. But our peace was short-lived. My father's head of security called my cell phone. He didn't say hello. He just said, "Jana, bring her to the house by 800 a.m. or we release the documents that will ruin Derek's career." The blackmail had begun. The gates of the big house opened slowly as we drove in. My father was standing on the porch, looking like the patriarch the world knows, but his eyes were cold. We walked into the living room, the room where we filmed so many perfect family moments. I laid Grandma Mary's VHS tape on the coffee table. My father didn't look at Faith. He looked at me and said, "Jana, you've destroyed your inheritance for a stranger." I looked him right in the eye and said, "She's not a stranger, Papa. She's your daughter." And this tape is the voice of your mother telling the world what you did with $20 million of ministry money. The room went deathly silent. "Ooh, The hours that followed were a whirlwind of shouting and legal threats. My father's lawyers tried to claim that the money was a charitable gift and that Faith had signed away her rights. But they forgot one thing: Faith was a child when those papers were signed. Under the law, a child cannot sign away their identity. As the lawyers argued, I saw my younger siblings peeking through the hallway. They were seeing the mask slip. They were seeing that our debt-free life was funded by the exile of their own sister. The empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing in real time. We knew we couldn't win this in a private room. We took the evidence to a national news network. When the story broke, the secret 20th Duggar child and the 20 million cover up, the world stood still. The phones at the big house didn't stop ringing. The ministry partners began to pull out. For 30 years, the truth was a spark. Now, it was a forest fire. I watched the news report with Faith by my side. She was finally Faith Duggar to the world, and no amount of money could take that back. The aftermath was painful. Some of my brothers took my father's side, blinded by the loyalty he had bought with their trust funds. But my sisters stood like a wall around Faith. We realized that the family values we were taught were real. We just had to apply them to the sister we were told to forget. My father retreated into his office, refusing to speak. The big house, once filled with the sound of 19 children, now felt like a hollow tomb of secrets. Wyatt went back to the cemetery to visit Grandma Mary's grave. Faith placed a white rose on the stone. I realized then that Grandma hadn't just left me a key, she had left me a chance for redemption. She knew that the only way to save the Duggar family was to expose its greatest sin. As the sun set over the Arkansas hills, I felt her presence. The 20 million secret was gone, replaced by a sisterly bond that no bank could ever hold. Faith is now living near us, getting to know her nieces and nephews. She's still a nurse, still the same gentle soul, but the fear in her eyes is gone. She's no longer a subject in a ledger or a line item in a ministry budget. She is a sister, a daughter, and a woman who stood up to a giant. The money is being audited, and the truth about the ministry funds is in the hands of the authorities. We don't know what the future holds for the Duggar name, but for the first time, it's a name Faith isn't ashamed to carry. I'm sitting in my garden now, the one I used to tend to while dreaming of a life I didn't have to hide. If you are watching this and you have a secret that is eating away at your family, if there is a faith in your life that you've been told to ignore, I beg you, find the key. The truth is expensive. It cost me my home, my inheritance, and the approval of my father. But it gave me my sister, and as I look at Faith playing with my sister's children in the yard, I realize that $20 million is a small price to pay for the soul of a family. I'm Jana Duggar, and the silence is finally over. God bless,